Hi everyone, Andy here again, Sewing Doc. What I want to talk about today is basically leaders and enders. This is not something that I came up with. I take zero credit for leaders and enders, but I will tell you that early on in my quilting hobby, I will say this made a huge difference in the way that I approach starting and stopping with my sewing. The reason that I guess I tuned into the leaders and enders theory is because I had the same issue that a lot of people have, and that is when you're sewing, that your machine does what we call eats your fabric. So you'd start off sewing, and either the edges of your fabric, your pieces get sucked into the little feed dog hole there, or you'd have your first stitches would just not be very tight. They'd be loose, kind of bunched up. So leaders and enders has changed everything for me. Basically, what leaders and enders are, you have your little pieces that, let's just see, let me grab two squares here so I can show you. You're going to have your two pieces that you're going to sew when you're piecing your quilt. So I have my little two right sides together here, and this is the seam that I want to sew. So typically this is what you would feed through, and then either eats the corner of your fabric and you have to take everything out and reset it, or your first stitches are bunched up or kind of thread nest a little bit. What we're going to do is start with a leader, and a leader is what is in before you're piecing. So, okay, so we're at the machine now. And what I have here, this is the piece that we're working on sewing, our actual piecing. What I'm going to suggest before we even do anything, and this applies to antique machines, vintage machines, computerized machines, machines that have thread cutters. All right, all machines. This is your upper thread. You can see it's threaded through your machine, goes through your needle. I have my bobbin in my machine. I'm going to turn my hand wheel toward me. You only turn your hand wheel toward you in any instance. You never want to turn your hand wheel away from you unless you're using a white rotary or an antique white machine that is direct drive. So you're going to turn your hand wheel toward you and bring your needle all the way back up, and you'll see down here, it's probably hard to see, but you're going to see this pulled up your bobbin thread, this little loop right here. So I'll take my scissors and I'll grab this, and now I have both the upper thread and the bobbin thread in my hand. This is what we want. So we have control over these two threads. And instead of going directly to the piece that I want to sew, this is my lazy method. This is just 2 scraps of fabric from an old project. I save a lot of these small scraps. If you're going to do this method, you don't want these to be very big pieces. You want this, you can do them long, but you want a narrow space because we don't want to waste a lot of thread. This is going to be our leader and our ender. So we're going to stick this under our machine. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just going to sew all the way across to your other side here. So you have a nice running start now. Basically what we're doing is manufacturing chain piecing, okay? So when you have if you're doing half square triangles and 500 of them for a project, you're automatically going to have a chain piecing technique going on. When you don't have that, then you're going to do this as your start. So this is your leader now. This is the piece that we want to sew. So we're going to butt this up right against that other fabric and the needle. And you're going to sew your seam like you normally would and keep it connected. Okay. So now we have, this is our leader. This is our piece. And you want to stop with your needle down. And then we're going to grab another one. What you can see here is just another scrap that I've been using over and over. And I'm going to use this as my ender. So we're going to stick this under there, butt it up against the fabric here, and then you're going to sew across that, okay? The reason being, when we clip off this fabric here, and your leader here, you're going to have a much cleaner seam here. And you can look and see my stitches at the beginning here and at the very end are very consistent all the way up to the edge. This also kept it from, a lot of times when you start sewing, I've heard a lot of complaints where it basically eats your fabric or sucks your fabric down here into the needle hole. So this prevents that. So this was the lazy method. Now the other method as a true leaders and ender method, I take zero credit for that. I know Bonnie Hunter, I will show you her book cover in a minute, but has a phenomenal book series on leaders and enders. Now, what I typically do, if I'm going to do a true leaders and enders, I will actually use these 2.5-inch squares. These are fabulous. These are, Moda makes these 2.5-inch candies, and it's usually from a line of fabric. This happens to be grunge, which we are a huge fan of grunge. This just happens to be a little pack of that. And so instead of using these scraps, I will use these as my leaders and enders. The reason being is I am actually using my leaders and enders to make a secondary quilt while I'm working on my main quilt. So you would just use these 2.5-inch squares in place of these scraps. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the book. I bought this, gosh, probably back when I first started quilting. So about probably 9 years ago. Somebody in my guild had turned me on to leaders and enders, and I was doing just the scrap method using little pieces. And I still do that, honestly. If I'm in a hurry and I just need to get something done and I don't have the brain capacity to keep up with 2 different things going on, I started using the scraps. And then I found this book, and you can see in it, there are all of these projects. If you're familiar with Bonnie's phenomenal organization, you can turn all your little scraps into a secondary quilt without really thinking about it. So I think there's a second version of this that you're going to want to look into. I will put a link in the comments to where you can find her book, and also some information on these 2.5-inch squares, but these are my favorite. So again, the main reason you want to do this is because it keeps your fabric from getting sucked into your machine. And then I can't tell you how priceless it is to have all of your seams looking this way. The one disappointment that I've had is, I upgraded to a Janome memory craft after probably my third year of quilting, and it has a thread cutter on it, which is phenomenal. But the problem is when I use my thread cutter, then that makes a shorter bobbin thread and an upper thread, which means then I would get all these little bungled threads in the beginning. So I almost disabled the use of that thread cutter, but I highly recommend this for all machines. So again, if you have any questions about the leaders and enders method, or your fabricating your machine, or anything you can do to improve that issue, send us an email or comment on below, or visit our website at sewingdoc.com. And if you're in the Atlanta area, stop into Red Hen Stitch Shop and see us. Information is also in the links. Thank you.